I stood in front of my closet at 5:30 in the morning, staring at the rows of blazers like a general surveying weapons before battle. Today wasn't just another board meeting. Today, I was going to war. And after 40 years in the nonprofit sector, I knew exactly how to choose my armor. The navy Tahari suit. Professional but not stuffy. Confident but not aggressive. I paired it with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones she wore when she became the first female bank manager in our county back in 1952. She'd given them to me the day I got my master's degree, whispering in my ear, "Never let them make you smaller, Margaret. You take up exactly the space you deserve." I wish I'd remembered those words sooner. My husband Paul was already downstairs, making coffee. After 38 years of marriage, we developed a comfortable rhythm, the kind where you don't need to speak to communicate. But lately, that rhythm felt offbeat. He'd been quieter than usual, avoiding eye contact when I talked about work. "Big day," he said, handing me a mug. Not a question, a statement. "The board's announcing the executive director transition timeline," I replied, straightening my collar in the hallway mirror. "Should be straightforward. I've been grooming the succession plan for 2 years." Paul nodded, but something flickered across his face. Concern? Pity? I couldn't quite read it. "Maggie," he started, then stopped. "Just be prepared for anything. Okay?" I should have pressed him then. Should have asked what he meant. But I was already mentally rehearsing my presentation, thinking about the coalition I'd built, the $3, $2 million in grants I'd secured this year alone, the new community health initiative that was being featured in the state legislature as a model program. The Hope Springs Community Foundation had been my life's work. I'd started as a volunteer coordinator 23 years ago, worked my way up through every department, earned my nonprofit management certificate at night school while raising our 2 kids. I knew every donor by name, every program inside and out. The executive director role wasn't just a promotion, it was the culmination of everything I'd built. I arrived at the office 40 minutes early, as always. Our building was a converted Victorian house on Maple Street, full of creaking stairs and uneven floors that gave it character. My office was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the community garden that had been my idea 5 years ago. Through the window, I could see early morning joggers passing by, completely unaware that their neighborhood nonprofit was about to implode. Rachel Hayes was already there, which was unusual. She was our youngest program manager, hired 3 years ago after graduating from some prestigious university I'd never heard of. 35 years old, sharp as a tack, and ambitious in a way that sometimes made me uncomfortable. Not because ambition was bad, God knows I'd been plenty ambitious in my time, but because hers felt calculated, like every conversation was a chess move. "Margaret, good morning!" She was too cheerful, too bright. "Excited about the meeting?" "Should be a good one," I replied carefully. Something in her smile set off alarm bells, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was being paranoid. Rachel and I had worked together successfully on multiple programs. She'd even thanked me publicly last month for mentoring her through the grant writing process. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. By 8:45, everyone had gathered in our conference room. The 12 board members, our current executive director James, who was retiring, the senior staff, and me. I'd prepared a brief presentation on the transition plan, assuming James would announce his retirement date, and I'd outline how we'd ensure continuity. But Rachel had prepared something too. A full slideshow, apparently. When James asked if anyone had anything to add to the agenda, Rachel's hand shot up immediately. "Actually, I've prepared some thoughts on the leadership transition that I think the board should hear." James looked surprised but nodded. "The floor is yours, Rachel." She stood, smoothing her dress also navy, I noticed, like she'd coordinated with me, and clicked to her first slide. It was a photo of our team, with circles highlighting different staff members. "Thank you all for being here," Rachel began, her voice steady and rehearsed. "I want to start by acknowledging the incredible work Margaret has done for this organization. 40 years of service is remarkable." My stomach tightened. When someone starts with excessive praise, they're about to throw you under the bus. "But I think we need to have an honest conversation about what Hope Springs needs for its next chapter." She clicked to the next slide. A demographic breakdown of our staff and constituents. Our community has changed dramatically. The median age has dropped to 34. 70% of the families we serve are under 40. Our staff reflects that shift, except at the senior level. She let that hang in the air for a moment. Margaret represents everything this organization has been. But is that what we need going forward? Rachel's eyes swept the room, carefully avoiding mine. The nonprofit sector is evolving. We need fresh perspectives, digital-first strategies, cultural competency for a new generation. With all due respect to Margaret's experience, I'm not sure that someone who still prints out emails is equipped to lead us into the next decade. The room went silent. Completely, utterly silent. I heard the clock ticking on the wall, heard someone's coffee cup clink against the table. She continued, gaining confidence from the lack of objection. I'm 35. I have an MBA from Columbia with a focus on nonprofit innovation. I've increased program participation by 40% in my department. I understand Instagram, TikTok, digital fundraising. More importantly, I can work 80-hour weeks without worrying about grandchildren's recitals or retirement planning. I felt my face flush hot. The grandchildren comment was a direct hit last month. I'd left early twice for my grandson's baseball games, something I'd cleared with James in advance. What I'm proposing, Rachel said, turning to address the board chair directly, is that Margaret consider stepping aside, not retiring fully. Of course we value her institutional knowledge. Perhaps a part-time advisory role? That way, she can enjoy her golden years while someone with the energy and vision for the future takes the helm. She said it so reasonably, so politely, like she was doing me a favor, like asking someone to give up their career was an act of kindness. Board Chair Patricia Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Rachel, this is highly irregular. Margaret is the most qualified candidate for the executive director position. Her performance reviews have been exemplary. I'm not questioning her past performance, Rachel replied smoothly. I'm questioning whether past performance predicts future success. The landscape has changed. We need someone who can change with it. I found my voice. Finally. May I respond to this? Patricia nodded quickly, looking relieved. I stood, my legs steadier than I expected. Rachel makes some interesting points about demographic shifts, so let me address them with data. I didn't have a slideshow prepared, but I'd been in this field long enough to know my numbers cold. In the last fiscal year, I personally secured $3.2 million in grants. That's a 43% increase from the previous year. I launched 2 new programs that are now being replicated by organizations in 3 other states. I built partnerships with the mayor's office, the school district, and 4 major corporations. I did this while managing a staff of 37 people, maintaining a 92% employee satisfaction rating, and yes, making it to some of my grandson's baseball games. I paused, looking directly at Rachel for the first time. You mentioned digital strategy. I oversee our digital team. Under my direction, our social media engagement increased 200%, and our online donations grew by $400,000. You're right that I don't personally manage our Instagram account. That's because I hired talented young people like yourself to do that, then gave you the resources and freedom to excel. Rachel's confident expression wavered slightly. As for working 80-hour weeks, I continued, my voice hardening, I spent 20 years doing exactly that. I missed bedtimes and school plays and anniversaries. I sacrificed my health and my family time because I believed that's what leadership required. But you know what I learned? Burnout culture isn't a badge of honor. It's a failure of management. If this organization requires 80-hour weeks to function, then we've failed to build sustainable systems. Some heads nodded around the table. I felt momentum shifting. You said I represent everything this organization has been. Like that's a negative. What I represent is institutional knowledge, relationship capital, and hard-won wisdom about what works and what doesn't in this community. That doesn't expire at age 60. I sat down, my heart pounding. Rachel looked less confident now, but she wasn't done. With respect, Margaret, you're proving my point. You're defensive about age because you know it's an issue. The sector is moving toward younger leadership for a reason. Donors want to see themselves reflected in leadership. Our staff needs someone they can relate to. So you're saying age discrimination is acceptable as long as we call it fresh perspective? I asked quietly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. James cleared his throat. I think we should table this discussion for now. The board will deliberate privately and make a decision about the succession timeline and process. Thank you both for your passionate presentations." The meeting dissolved into awkward silence. People filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact with both me and Rachel. Only Patricia stayed behind. "Margaret, I am so sorry," she said. "I had no idea Rachel was planning that ambush." "Did you?" I asked. "Or did someone tell her she had an opening?" Patricia's guilty expression told me everything. I grabbed my bag and walked out, skipping my usual morning routine of checking in with each department. I couldn't face anyone right now. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with shaking hands, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed, a text from Paul. How did it go? I couldn't even formulate a response. Instead, I drove. Not home, not to any particular destination, just drove through neighborhoods I'd served for 2 decades. Past the community center where we'd started our after-school program. Past the food bank that had nearly closed before we'd stepped in with emergency funding. Past the senior center where I'd launched our intergenerational mentorship program that connected elders with at-risk youth. Every block held a memory, a success story, a family I'd helped, and someone who barely knew this community thought I should step aside so she could add executive director to her LinkedIn profile. I ended up at Miller's Lake, the one spot in our town that hadn't changed in 40 years. Found a bench and sat there, watching ducks paddle across the water, trying to figure out who I was if I wasn't Margaret Thompson, nonprofit leader. That's when I realized I'd done it again. I'd made myself small. Not intentionally, not dramatically, but slowly, over time, I'd compressed myself into a shape that fit other people's expectations. The devoted wife who never made her husband feel threatened by her success. The dedicated professional who worked twice as hard as male colleagues to prove she deserved a seat at the table. The grandmother who always said yes to babysitting, even when it meant missing networking events. I'd become a function, not a person. Wife, worker, grandmother, volunteer, always defined by what I did for others, never by who I was. Rachel's words echoed, golden years. As if being over 60 meant I was done, used up, ready to be archived like old files. As if experience and wisdom were liabilities instead of assets. My phone rang. "Patricia. Margaret. I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. Rachel approached 3 board members privately before today. She positioned it as concern for the organization, but basically lobbied for your job. Some board members are receptive. Why? Honestly? Ageism. Though they'd never call it that. They're worried about optics and energy and innovation. Code words for, "She's too old." Patricia sighed. "I'm fighting it, but I need you to fight too. That performance in the meeting wasn't enough. You were defensive. You need to show them you're not just protecting your position, you're the best person for it." After we hung up, I sat there for another hour. The sun climbed higher. A family arrived with bread to feed the ducks. Children laughed. Life continued, indifferent to my crisis. But something crystallized in my mind. I thought about my grandmother, about those pearl earrings, about that whispered advice. I thought about every time I'd made myself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Every time I'd apologized for my success, or downplayed my accomplishments, or qualified my expertise. I thought about Paul's weird behavior this morning and realized he'd known. Rachel must have talked to him, probably at some community event, gauging whether I'd be reasonable about stepping aside. And he'd said something or hadn't said something that made her think I was vulnerable. The old Margaret would have gone home, cried, maybe started updating her resume, would have convinced herself that maybe Rachel had a point, maybe it was time to step back, make room for the next generation. But sitting there on that bench, watching the lake reflect the sky, I realized something. I didn't want to step back. I wanted to step up, not because I needed the validation or the title or the salary, but because I wasn't done yet. I had more to give, more to build, more to prove not to anyone else, but to myself. I texted Paul, "We need to talk. Tonight." Then I texted Patricia, "Call an emergency board meeting. I have a presentation to make." The next 3 days were a blur. I worked like I hadn't worked in years, not just harder, but smarter. I reached out to every board member individually. I compiled data on outcomes, not just outputs. I contacted 3 of our major donors and asked them point blank, "If I were executive director, would you continue supporting us?" All 3 said yes immediately and offered to speak to the board. I also did something I'd never done before. I hired a consultant, not for strategy, but for presentation, a young woman named Aisha, who specialized in helping executives amplify their presence. She was blunt. "You dress like you're apologizing for taking up space," she said, eyeing my conservative blazers. "You're a leader who's earned her position. Look like it." She took me shopping. We found a crimson suit that made me look powerful without trying. Bold, silver jewelry. A new haircut that was professional, but contemporary. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself, but in a good way. Paul and I had our conversation that night. He admitted that Rachel had indeed approached him at a fundraising dinner, asking subtle questions about my retirement plans and whether I was ready to slow down. He'd said something non-committal that she apparently took as encouragement. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I thought." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I thought maybe it wasn't the worst idea. You've been so stressed, Maggie. You work constantly. I thought maybe stepping back wouldn't be bad." "You thought wrong," I said quietly. "I'm stressed because I care, not because I'm incapable, and you should have told me." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I was trying to protect you, but I was really just trying to protect myself from having a working wife for another decade." At least he was honest. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Patricia had framed it as a strategic planning session to avoid tipping off Rachel, but word had spread. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, looking confident in her own navy suit. The board assembled. Patricia called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss the executive director transition," she announced. "Both Margaret and Rachel have expressed interest in the position. Given the unconventional nature of last week's meeting, we felt it appropriate to give both candidates a fair opportunity to present their vision for Hope Springs." Rachel went first. Her presentation was polished, professional, full of buzzwords about disruption and innovation and reimagining nonprofit delivery. She showed mock-ups of a new website, a proposed social media strategy, ideas for gamifying donor engagement. It was impressive, I had to admit. Trendy and energetic and forward-thinking. When she finished, there was polite applause. Then it was my turn. I stood in my crimson suit, with my grandmother's pearls, and I didn't use a slideshow. Instead, I told a story. 23 years ago, I walked into this organization as a volunteer. I was 40 years old, recently returned to the workforce after staying home with my kids. I had a bachelor's degree in English and absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each board member. James took a chance on me, gave me increasingly bigger responsibilities, let me fail sometimes and learn from it, invested in my education and development, and I worked my tail off to prove his faith wasn't misplaced. In those 23 years, I've seen this organization through 3 recessions, 4 executive directors, countless staff changes, and more challenges than I can count. I've watched programs fail and learned why. I've watched programs succeed and learned how to replicate that success. I clicked to my first slide, just one, a photo I'd taken that morning at sunrise in our community garden. Rachel talked about innovation. Here's what innovation actually looks like. It's not a new website or a viral TikTok. It's understanding your community so deeply that you can anticipate needs before they become crises. It's relationships built over decades, not months. It's knowing when to pivot and when to stay the course because you've seen this pattern before. My second slide showed our funding growth over 20 years, with my involvement highlighted. Rachel is right that the sector is changing, but sustainable change doesn't come from burning down what works and starting over. It comes from taking what's strong and building on it. She mentioned digital fundraising. Under my direction, we've grown online giving by 400%. She mentioned cultural competency. I've diversified our staff from 12% people of color to 47%. She mentioned fresh perspectives. I've created a leadership development program that's launched 6 staff members into director roles at other organizations. I paused, letting the data sink in. Rachel suggested I don't understand the current generation. Let me counter that. I've successfully led 4 generations of staff. I've adapted to every technological shift from fax machines to Zoom. I've weathered changing political climates and economic upheavals. That's not being stuck in the past. That's being resilient and adaptable. My third slide was a quote from Peter Drucker, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Rachel has a beautiful strategy, but strategy without culture crashes and burns. I've built the culture of this organization. I know every person on our team, their strengths and struggles. I know our donors, what matters to them, why they give. I know our community not from data dashboards, but from 23 years of showing up. I clicked to my final slide. It was blank except for one question. What does this organization actually need? You need someone who can execute, not just ideate. Someone with proven fundraising relationships, not theoretical ones. Someone who's been tested by crisis and came through stronger. Someone who won't bail for a better opportunity in 3 years because this isn't a resume builder, it's my life's work. I looked directly at Rachel for the first time. Rachel is talented. She's smart and ambitious and has valuable skills. In 5 years, she'll be ready for an ED role probably at a larger organization than this one. But right now, today, with everything this organization faces, you need experience. You need relationships. You need someone who loves this place enough to stay when it's hard. I sat down. The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than last week. This wasn't shock, it was consideration. Board member David Chen spoke first. "Margaret, I have to ask, how long do you see yourself in this role?" It was a fair question, the subtext being, will we have to do this again in 2 years? "I'm 62, I said clearly. "I plan to work another 8 to 10 years. That gives us time to genuinely develop internal candidates, to build a succession plan that's thoughtful rather than reactionary. Rachel will be 43 then, with a decade more experience. Or we'll have other qualified internal candidates. But rushing into leadership before someone's ready doesn't serve anyone." Patricia glanced around the table. "Any other questions for either candidate?" Rachel raised her hand. "I'd like to say something." Her voice was quieter now, less confident. "Margaret's right that I'm ambitious. I don't apologize for that. But I realize now that I let my ambition override my judgment. I approached this transition in a way that was disrespectful to Margaret and to this process. I'm sorry for that." She paused, and I saw something genuine in her expression for the first time. If the board chooses Margaret when the board chooses Margaret, I hope I can continue learning from her, because she's right about something else. I'm not ready yet. I will be, but I'm not now. I nodded at her. A small gesture of acknowledgement. It took courage to say that publicly. Patricia called for a vote. It was unanimous. As we filed out of the conference room, Rachel caught my arm. "Thank you for not destroying me in there." "You could have. That's not who I am," I replied. "Besides, you're going to be a great leader someday, just maybe not today." She smiled, a little sadly. "For what it's worth, I really do think age is going to be an issue in the sector." "It already is," I agreed. "Which is exactly why I'm not going anywhere. Someone has to prove that 62 isn't obsolete. Might as well be me." 3 months later, on my first day as executive director, I wore the crimson suit again, my grandmother's pearls, and a new confidence that came from knowing I hadn't compromised or apologized or made myself smaller. I created a new position, Director of Strategic Innovation, offered it to Rachel. She accepted. At my first all-staff meeting, I announced 3 initiatives: a comprehensive leadership development program, a formal mentoring system pairing experienced staff with newer ones, and a flexible work policy that acknowledged we all have lives outside these walls. I spent too many years believing that sacrifice was the same as leadership. I told my team that working yourself into exhaustion was noble. I was wrong. We're going to build a culture where you can be excellent at your job and present in your life, where experience is valued and ambition is encouraged, where you don't have to choose between success and sustainability. That evening, I drove home past all the same landmarks, but everything looked different. The community center, the food bank, the senior center, they weren't just places I'd served, they were places I'd led and would continue leading. Paul had dinner waiting, a peace offering after weeks of tension. How was the first day, Madame Executive Director? Exhausting, I admitted. Exhilarating, exactly what I needed. After dinner, I went to my small home studio, the one I'd been meaning to set up for years but never had time. Unpacked the oil paints I'd bought on a whim 2 years ago and never opened. Found a blank canvas. I didn't paint that night, I was too tired, but I set everything up, ready for when I had time. Because that was the other lesson I'd learned. You don't have to choose between your work and yourself. You can be the executive director and the painter, the leader and the grandmother, the professional and the person. You can be all of it if you stop asking permission and start taking up the space you've earned. My grandmother's voice echoed as I turned off the studio light. Never let them make you smaller, Margaret. You take up exactly the space you deserve. I finally understood what she meant. It wasn't about being louder or pushier or more aggressive. It was about refusing to shrink. About knowing your worth and standing in it, especially when someone else wants your seat. I'd gone to war, just like I'd planned. But the enemy wasn't Rachel or the board, or even ageism. The enemy was my own willingness to accept less than I'd earned. And I'd won. Not by destroying anyone else, but by finally, after 62 years, refusing to destroy myself.